Well, good evening. Welcome to the beautiful dome room of the Rotunda here at the University of Virginia for Sojourner's Truth, Choosing Freedom and Courage in a Divided World, an evening with Natasha Sistrunk Robinson. My name is Karen Wright-Marsh. I'm the Executive Director of Theological Horizons, a nonprofit here in Charlottesville that supports Christians and seekers by providing a welcoming community for engaging in faith, thought, and life. It's our honor to present this special event thanks to the generous partnership of the Division for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the University of Virginia. We are also very grateful to the wonderful Sherry Winston, Associate Director for Rotunda and University Events, to the students, the staff, the board, the supporters of Theological Horizons, for everyone who made this event possible tonight. Before I introduce our speaker, a few preliminaries. I'd like to acknowledge that the land upon which we stand is the ancestral land of the Monacan Indian Nation, who have been here since time immemorial. We also acknowledge and pay respect to the enslaved and free Black laborers who, through their labor, their knowledge, and their very lives, built this place, the University of Virginia. And we wish to express our deep gratitude for the witness of their descendants who flourish among us even today. So whether you're here joining us in person in this beautiful space as the sun sets, or watching online, it is our hope that you too will find a welcome in this enriching conversation, and the video will be archived later on the Theological Horizons website. Following Ms. Robinson's talk, there will be time for question and answer, and that time will be gathered and guided by Carolyn Mitchell Dillard. Reverend Dillard is the University Community Liaison in the Division for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and she is the pastor of the Zion Hill Baptist Church in Keswick, and I know she would invite you to come and join for worship, am I right? Our time together will conclude at 7:00 p.m. And so, Natasha Sistrunk Robinson returns tomorrow at 1:00, if you haven't had enough tonight, and I know you won't, to talk with students and others on the topic of leadership lessons. She will be joined by Navy Commander LaDonna M. Simpson, who is a decorated commanding officer of the USS Carter Hall. So all are welcome to this lunch across the street under the white tent at St. Paul's on the corner. That will also be live streamed on Facebook tomorrow around 1:00. I encourage you to visit our local Sycamore Tree Books and pick up Natasha Robinson's books, which include A Sojourner's Truth, another wonderful book, Mentor for Life, Finding Purpose Through Intentional Discipleship, and Hope for Us, Knowing God Through the Nicene Creed. I'm so honored to introduce my friend, who I've only met on Zoom and now in person, Natasha Sistrunk Robinson. She is an international speaker and author and the host of a Sojourner's Truth podcast. She's a leadership consultant. She is a diversity and mentoring coach with more than 20 years of leadership experience in the military, in the federal government, in the church, seminary, and the nonprofit sectors. Ms. Robinson is the president of T3 Leadership Solutions Incorporated and the visionary founder and chairperson of the nonprofit Leadership Links Incorporated. She is a doctoral student at North Park Theological Seminary, an alumna of Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, Charlotte, a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and she has served as a Marine Corps officer and with the Department of Homeland Security. So it is my great pleasure to present Natasha Sistrunk Robinson. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's Thursday. COVID has time messed up for everybody. I don't know what day it is anymore. Thank you all for coming. I'm so excited to be with you this evening and to share. I'm really going to share some stories about living through difficult times, and I hope that it challenges you, but also inspires you in a new way. I'm sharing today from the topic of when death becomes us. I was born January 6th, a New Year's baby, to my mother and my biological father. And they were married at the time, but a few years later, they were separated and then divorced, and I never saw my dad during those years, and so I don't remember a whole bunch about him. My mother found love again, and she married a man who raised me. He raised me and my sister, and later they adopted my brother. And this black man was a wonderful husband. He was a wonderful father. He was a hard worker. He was a strong disciplinarian. He was someone who made me believe that I could be and do anything that I wanted. And by the time that I was a junior in high school, I moved in with my maternal grandparents. And I did that because my father was a roofing contractor by trade. And he was looking for better work opportunities, and so they moved about 45 minutes down the street, and I was able to stay with my maternal grandparents, which meant that I spent nearly every day with my maternal grandfather, who I loved dearly. He would recline in his favorite chair in our living room, and I would sit on the floor and cuddle up next to him as he watched the nightly news. I didn't care anything about politics, but I just wanted to be near him. And he was a gentleman. He was kind, the kind of man who sung in the choir at church and served his community and loved his family. He was a World War II veteran. He would walk, even as an old person, to keep his physical stamina up. And I was a competitive athlete. I ran track, and to stay in shape in the off season, I would run cross country. And so on the afternoons when I was running outside, he would always walk in the opposite direction in the neighborhood. He would always have a big stick to ward off all the dogs. But he would walk in the opposite direction so he can keep his eye on me. His mindset was, well, Tasha should be coming around the corner right about now. And he cared. He loved me well. And one day when I returned to my grandparents' home near the end of my junior year of high school, I was on an emotional high, because that day I was one of the few girls that were allowed to ride the bus as our football team went to their bowl game. And these were my brothers. These were the same guys that was on the track team with me, and that year we won. The girls and the boys track team won the state championship. I was so very excited for my friends. I believe we won the game that day because I just remember being so happy. And when my friend dropped me back home at my grandparents' house, it was still a beautifully bright and sunny day. But there were a lot of cars in the yard. And I was perplexed. At 17 years old, I walk into the house, and I'm talking to a lot of you young people in this moment, because if you haven't experienced it already, I want you to think about how quickly your life can change in an instant. I entered into the house only to find that my grandfather was no longer with us. And the only words I remember mustering was that he left me. And my grandmother reached down to pick me up off of the floor, and she said, he left all of us. He was the first major death that registered in my young life. Fast forward 2 years to the summer of 1998. By this time, I'm a freshman, a plebe at the United States Naval Academy. I'm attending my first 6 weeks of what they call plebe summer. It's the Naval Academy's version of boot camp. Back home, I had an aunt who struggled with a drug addiction. And that summer, she died from complications having to do with HIV or AIDS. And my parents made a choice not to inform me right away because they thought that I was undergoing enough stress going through my military training. And they were right. Therefore, I was not allowed to attend her funeral. I was not given space to grieve. So when my parents came to visit me about 3 weeks into, maybe 4 into plebe summer, and I asked about her, they told me that she was gone. And I remember crying in the bathroom in the hotel. I cried once. And then I went back to work because I had work to do. Fast forward 1 year. It's late at night. I was already sound asleep in my bedroom at the Naval Academy, and my company chief is at the foot of the bed. You know, we had these bunk beds like IKEA style, the beds on top of the desk, good engineering. And so he kept calling my name. Miss Shipman Sistrunk, I need you to get up. I think that I'm dreaming because there should not be a man in my room if he was not invited, and certainly not at the Naval Academy. He kept calling my name, and I finally opened my eyes to see and acknowledge his presence. Then he tells me that my mother is gone. I say no. I repeat that multiple times, and I turn over, and he calls me again. I think this is a bad nightmare. Miss Shipman Sistrunk, I need you to get up to make a phone call home to your family because your mother has died. I was 21 years old. It was only 2 days after my mother's 52nd birthday. 1 week before final exams, 2 weeks before Christmas. That's the day that I became a matriarch. I went home to plan her funeral. The death of my grandfather, the death of my aunt, the death of my mother was the start of a 16-year wilderness. A long series of time where I lost 11 close family members. I was going home about once every year and a half only to attend funerals of loved ones, some who died of natural causes in good old age, some very tragic, drugs and accidents, and some gone way too soon. How many times does someone return home only to find that they have lost pieces of themselves? And before they realize that home doesn't feel like home anymore. And in fact, no place does. Death is personal. And it's also communal. You see, I remember exactly where I was when the first plane hit the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. I was finishing up work on an essay in the Writing Center at the Naval Academy. I'm in my senior year now. The Naval Academy is a beautiful campus, much like this one. And from the Writing Center to Bancroft Hall, there's a nice long walkway through what looks like a park. And Bancroft Hall is where, it's the largest dormitory in the world, is where 4,000 students Miss Shipman call home. And somewhere between that walk from the Writing Center to Bancroft Hall, the second plane hit. So by the time I got to Bancroft, it was very clear to me and everyone that our country was under attack, that my classmates and I were likely going to war, So my mindset graduating from the United States Naval Academy and being commissioned as an officer in the United States Marine Corps was that I would become a war fighter. And lots of people were going to die. That was not an option. It was a certainty. Death had again knocked at my door, but it was in a different way this time. And as I prepared for tonight, I was thinking about so many of you, but especially the young people, the students here at the school, because maybe you don't remember living through that time. But I remember the sailors and the Marines that didn't come home, and those who did return with mental illnesses and addictions, those homes that were no longer safe but turned into places of domestic violence and abuse. And then there were separations and divorces and children who missed their parents and didn't know why mommy or daddy wasn't home. I know that some of you young people, you remember growing up in a political climate where our nation's leaders talked a lot about hope until there was none. And then years later, we were hit with this thing called the coronavirus. I never knew that was a word until last year. Through COVID-19, I'm reminded that for the younger generations among us, that many of you are experiencing massive death in what I would call a wilderness for the first time. But others of you who've lived a little longer, you've had numerous wilderness experiences. You have grieved the death of parents and perhaps children, or failed marriages or pregnancies, mended broken hearts and cried over lost relationships, the time you got fired or laid off, the opportunity you missed, the job or promotion you didn't get, the expectations that were not met. You've had your heart sink. You wrestle with your own anxieties and addictions and bouts of depression and perhaps suicidal thoughts, because the deaths of our life and relationships are all personal. But death is also communal. This week, the New York Times and the Global Change Data Lab reported that the United States has suffered deaths of 750,000 people, 5 million people across the world because of this COVID-19. And in addition to the continuous loss of things and grieving that we are doing in our personal lives, there remains still these unnatural ways that we are engaging or disengaging with other humans that were created for community. And if you are a person of faith and a praying person, it's okay to confess that sometimes you have been disappointed with God, that you have felt abandoned, that perhaps God has not heard or does not care about the things that concern you. I know that space. And I would be remiss if I did not honor standing in this place in my Black and feminine body, that sometimes it feels like my very being is lended itself to a death sentence. See, I'm a Black girl who was raised in South Carolina. So I've studied the systemic oppression of our nation's founding, the erasure of the indigenous people, the original stewards of our land. I've watched this narrative about our American exceptionalism, and I hope you know by now that I do love this country. But it's been built on a distorted theological imagination, a myth about Anglo-Saxon purity, the dehumanization of Black bodies through the transatlantic slave trade. We know this if we are honest and we tell the truth. And that system evolved into Black codes and overwork and underpayment of sharecroppers, and then lynching, and then Jim Crow segregation. And during that time period, there was a massacre in my hometown. Well, Black kids from my high school and the historically Black college and university, they gathered for a peaceful protest because all they wanted to do was bowl at the only bowling alley that was within a 20-mile radius of our town. But the police opened fire on that crowd, injuring several students and murdering 17-year-old Delana Middleton and 18-year-old Henry Smith and 18-year-old Samuel Hampton Jr. The police beat the married college student Louise Kelly Cawley so severely that she miscarried her baby a week later. See, Jim Crow was birthed out of the seas of slavery. And it included voter suppression. And it evolved into the war on drugs. That's my generation. And then mass incarceration, or what Dr. Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow. So when we do our social and historical analysis, and for some of us, a theological reflection, it seems like the Black body is only valued as a commodity when it is defined by the white imagination and then lorded over and tamed and abused by that imagination. And when that body does not yield itself to that domination, the result is often death. So when I look at this historical information, when I think about the generational trauma and the racialized violence against Black people, and I hear names like Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis and Philando Castile, like these people, these humans, some of them children like Tamir Rice, they're not just hashtags to me. They're not social media commentary and political commentary. Their deaths are personal. Their deaths are communal. Because for Black people in America, being outside has not always felt safe. I recall there's a professor and political commentator by the name of Dr. Mark Lamont Hill. He was speaking about Sandra Bland, Black woman. He said that she was a Black woman who was arrested for exercising her dignity in public. She was pulled over for a routine traffic stop, and then a few days later found dead mysteriously in her jail cell. The murder of the Charleston Nine happened about an hour and a half down the street from where I grew up. My aunt went to school with some of the people that lay on the floor bleeding out in Emmanuel AME Church because black bodies are not safe at church. And then I think about it, Tatiana Jefferson and Breonna Taylor. And then I realize that black bodies are not safe in their own homes. See, these humans, they had lives and hopes and dreams and people who loved them. And I also know too well what it means and what it looks like for a child to have the lives of people that they love snatched away from them. What that absence means for the life of a young person. Or worse, what the trauma means when the young person is right there when the incident happens. You see, Tatiana moved to a new city so she can take care of her ailing mother. She was murdered at home while playing video games with her 8-year-old nephew. Philando was shot while sitting in his car next to his girlfriend. In the back seat, their 4-year-old daughter. And this little black girl, she did not in that moment comfort her own self about the loss and death that she experienced. She turned her attention to the needs of her mother. She said to her mother, "I'm okay, it's okay. I'm right here with you." Where did she learn how to respond that way? If not for a generational and racialized trauma, if not from a personal experience of death being so near to her and present at the age of 4. That's the tragedy of being black in America. I've written about this metaphor of wilderness a lot. See, the wilderness is a desert. It is a place where death is. Sometimes there's a lot of heat. There's a lot of dry space. It can be a physical place of isolation. It can be no place at all. It is a metaphor, after all. When I think about the wilderness, I think about the words of the Catholic priest Henry Now, and I love him. He writes about the place of conversion. And this is how he defines the place. He says it's a place where the old self dies and where the new self is born. It is a place where the emergence of a new man or new woman occurs. Generally, it's a place where we are fully present, where our senses are heightened, where change occurs. The wilderness is where we pay attention to ourselves, to God, to our purpose, to our life's calling, to the work that has been assigned to our hands for whatever limited time that we have here on this earth. That's why I'm sharing with you tonight about this topic, when death becomes us. I want us to think deeply about some questions like, what happens when death becomes us? What happens to our mind and to our body and to our soul and spirit? What happens to our relationships? You see, I've gone in and out of many wilderness experiences. I've entered into these places of conversion. I've wrestled with these questions for a long time, and I know what it's like when death is all around and when you feel like you're in a perpetual graveyard and yet you feel trapped in a cage, on a hamster wheel, not wanting to get off because you're not dead yet. And you don't want to quit on yourself and on life, but you're also not okay. You don't know what to say or to whom. And even if you had the right words, it wouldn't matter because you know that the people that you talk to cannot fix your brokenness. Humans cannot bring dead things back to life. So for me, that's why I have clung to a person and a faith that can sustain me when the world offers me death at every turn. I do not believe that humans were created to die. That is why death and grief, however near and present it may be, feel so disjointed and distant from us. But it's not just the loss of life that we experience. In our society, we have also experienced the death of deep, rich, loving, trustworthy relationships because we've created this facade behind screens. We have experienced the death of civil discourse, the death of critical thinking, the death of bold and courageous leadership, the death of truth-telling, the death of love of one's neighbor, even when we disagree. What happens when death becomes us? I think we have allowed the death to make us emotionally numb. Because the truth is, it takes work to choose life. It takes work to go against the grain, to care, to pause, to listen, to learn, to tell the truth about our history. It takes work to inform yourself and to do research so that you can respond intelligently about issues. To act in humility when you have done wrong or when you don't have the answers, instead of pretending that you're right and acting as if you do. It takes work to tell the truth in a society where everything is relative. And when the only people who seem to have common sense are in your camp. It takes work to build and lead well when everything around you is rubble. It takes work to connect with people who are not like you, to forgive, to care, to trust, and to love again. It takes work to have hope and faith despite of what we see. Robert E. Quinn wrote, "When given a choice between deep change and slow death, we tend to choose slow death." In this place of conversion tonight, I'm inviting you, the right now and future leaders of our country, into deep change. This is a conundrum of our lives. Death and life are the only two options. Who are you becoming individually and collectively as a community? What path will you chart as community servants and educators and students in this world. I'm inviting you to choose a life of freedom and courage and love. Freedom for everybody. Courage to do the right thing even when no one's watching, and even when you may lose some friends or family member or time or money, because sometimes that's what integrity costs. Integrity means doing the right thing when no one is looking or listening. Being a leader of integrity means doing and saying the right thing simply because it's right. Choosing to love includes having empathy and concern for other humans. See, death is only being concerned about one's own self-interest. It breeds isolation and not community. But in the face of death, when isolation and pursuing one's own self-interest are easy pursuits, I'm inviting you to choose a more difficult, more rewarding, more courageous path of love. For Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote that "'tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." So if we intentionally and consistently choose a life of freedom and courage and love, that can become us too. Therefore, let us choose life. Thank you.
I'm going to invite us all to breathe. Just take a moment and breathe. Feel what you're feeling. Engage with yourself. Grief and loss are a part of our lives. We don't know the day, nor the hour. And we love to think that we know how we would react if something was to happen. But the truth is, as we grow and as we learn and as we develop and as we mature, as we allow ourselves to mature, you never know how you're going to grieve or respond until it happens. I'm asking us to take this time now to just breathe. Because we all have a reason why we are here tonight. Some is, oh, I love the book. Oh, I've read her work. Oh, the sojourning is a topic that I love. Oh, I haven't been out, and I'm going to go to the dome room. But I trust and I believe that this talk, this sermon that she has given this evening, touches each one of us on some level. So before I open for questions, I have a question, and then I will, because I'm going to ask Natasha to come back to her space, and then we'll allow for 4 questions this evening. If anyone would like an index card to write your question and I just read it, I'm happy to do that. So just raise your hand if you would like that. I just want to share very briefly, because I know that we have about 17 minutes of time left, but thank you for talking about being a black woman. Because we look good. Yeah. We carry ourselves well. But there's a lot in here. There's a lot in here. There's a backpack that you can't see that's got about 50 pounds on it. But you see the smile. And I just ask that we all, whether we're black, white, Asian, no matter what we are, that we realize that we are all human beings. And what we see on the outside is truly a shell of who we are on the inside. So the question is, we're in a time in our life now where everybody's getting in touch with themselves, and we're told to make space for yourself. How will you make space for yourself today? What will you do for you today? How will you make space for your grief? And that's a question that we have to answer. And I'm going to ask Natasha, how do you make space and time? Because see, time keeps going. The person dies, you grieve, and you serve the chicken dinner, and you entertain the guests that have come to your house. And then people leave, and you have to go back to work. And you're months down the road, and you hear your mother's voice, or you hear your father's voice, or you see the old car that you used to drive in, or there's a smell that comes. How do you give yourself space and be okay with it? So that is my question. How do you truly make space for yourself when you've been told, don't let them see you cry? Be strong. Be strong. We're a strong people. How do you make space for yourself? You're not on.
She's saying she can't hear me.
You're not on.
Test 1, 2.
There we go.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you back there. I had to learn. And the learning was in unlearning the unhealthy ways. I mean, really, I didn't grieve for 12 years. That's the truth. Because, when I think about, my mother, like literally I went home for the funeral and I came back and I missed exams, so I had to take exams. And I went back home to Christmas that didn't feel like Christmas at all, right? And so there just wasn't space for it because you don't get maternity leave or sick leave, or, you can't just take time off at the Naval Academy. Like you have stuff to do. And so I realized after the fact that I became a stuffer, right? You just kind of push it down. I did a lot of that. And it wasn't until I think I got to seminary, so I'm 10 years later maybe at the time, and I was coming up on the end of that wilderness. Some stuff happened, and I had a spiritual director who was very gracious with me, asking me a lot of hard questions and things. And I had people in my class that were great, like peer mentors. I remember, there's a pastor who said, Natasha, he said, is sleep a waste of your time? I was like, it used to be, right? This very crazy, unrealistic things you do to survive in an environment, because not doing those things means you quit or you don't finish. And so I had to unlearn all of those healthy ways of being. I had to unlearn, like sometimes you just need a nap. That's the thing, you just need a nap. And, sometimes like you can ask for help. And sometimes you can pay people to do things you don't want to do if you have the ability and the privilege to do that. So it's like being I would say gracious with yourself in those small things. Like I don't have to carry everything for everybody, right? Pray, lament. Me and God had a lot of conversations, and they were always honest. You know, sometimes I go to therapy, right? You know, and I think when we talk about human dignity, it's about taking care of the whole person, the whole body. Like, so I'm very intentional about that. Like how I care for this one vessel I have. I'm very intentional about that. Yeah.
Thank you. The floor is open for questions. So would you like to come up?
And thank you for your service. I heard that.
Thank you. My name is Chip Keister. I'm also a veteran and a graduate of Gordon Conwell. But
Oh, very nice.
was wondering if you could talk about the process of choosing to leave the Marine Corps, and if that was a choice of life, or how that played at that point in your life.
Yep, gladly. Yeah, so I did 6 years in the Marine Corps. When I graduated from the academy, I thought I was going to do 20 because I was motivated. I loved the Marine Corps. I was very good at it. I was a very good Marine, and they were paying me good money. So it was like a win-win all the way around. However, I was married. So those things I talked to you about the sailors and Marines, all those things were happening on my base, right? So I was very, very near to it in the field. My first duty station was Camp Lejeune. And so people were they were deploying every 6 months. And the 3 months of the 6 that they were home, they were working up for the next deployment. And it was just a casualty, you know, all the way around. And I was like, I want this marriage to work, right? And I can't work on a marriage if I'm not home. That's number one. Number two, that I had my daughter. And one of the deaths in that long thing I told you was our first child. So we lost our first child, and then I was like 5 months into that pregnancy. So it's like, I didn't want to leave my child. And so for me, it was just really a personal decision that I made. And, you know, it's one of the things to grieve too, because like right now my classmates are starting to retire. And I want that check, you know, but God, you know, God had other plans, and I don't regret at all the decision that I made. Yeah, you're welcome. Y'all quiet. Come on down. Is that you?
So, stop crying, and ask if you will tell us about how, given all of the consulting work and the other work that you do, that you carve out time for yourself to pour into young girls, not just black girls, and also carry the grief and the weight of the things that I know that they carry, in the way that I know that you do. So, anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ma'am. For me, yeah, she was asking, because, you know, people masked up, it's kind of hard. She was asking, how do I carve out time to pour into, like, the next generation of girls and mentor and stuff like that when I'm still carrying so much stuff. And to me, you know, I talk at the end of the talk about choosing life and, you know, being a communal person. I really am. And so I think part of the challenge we have in our culture, especially among young people, that we're so inward focused. So if I only thought about my own stuff all the time, I probably wouldn't get out of bed, right? Because, I mean, that's, you know, because it's a lot. But I get a lot of joy. I get a lot of joy by looking someone in the eye, and letting them know that they're known and loved and seen, and affirming their identity and dreaming with them about the purpose that God has for their lives. And so I get a lot of joy out of that. But I also do that because I've been a beneficiary of mentoring. And so I credit almost like all the stuff I've been able to do in my life because other people had, invested in me in that way. And I know I wouldn't be the person I am today if I had not had those people investing in me in that way. And so to me, this is about, kind of giving back a good and reasonable service, and it's good. And I think too, it's been intentional about saying, and this might go to your previous question as well, Ms. Carolyn, but intentional about what I say yes and no to. Like I do a lot, but I don't do all the things people ask me to do, right? I just don't. Because at this age, I just don't have to, I don't have to. And so, the way, I just feel like, God has provided for me and my family, and I can be selective about the things I say yes to and no to, and how I live my life. Like, just a simple thing, like I'm a night owl by trade, right? So if I go to bed at 1 o'clock, but I'm an entrepreneur, so I get up when I get up. Like, I'm not like getting up at 5 o'clock, like why? Like, I don't even think well at that time. And then it takes me a good hour to get ready to address other humans. Like, I need to pray and read and stuff, so my life is now intentionally orchestrated to be purposeful in how I live. And I tell you the greatest joy about that, friend, is, my daughter said to me, my daughter's 14, and she said to me not that long ago, she said, Ma, it's very impressive the life you set up for yourself. And I'm like, well, by golly, I've done something right. Because as a parent, you feel like a failure a lot. But I was like, man, she caught something, But the only reason I can make these choices today is because I made hard choices back then. I made hard choices consistently and did the hard thing consistently back then so I can be where I am today and have more freedom to choose. Yeah. Anybody else? Y'all quiet. It's so quiet.
So how about writing? How has that been life-giving for you?
Yeah, it's kind of therapy sometimes. Yeah, writing is interesting because I didn't set out to be a writer. I didn't. It wasn't one of the things on my bucket list or one of the plans I had for my life. I really was going to do 20 years in Marine Corps. I was very clear about that. But I majored in English at the Naval Academy. So the Naval Academy is a technical school, it's a STEM school. So I actually have a Bachelor of Science, not a Bachelor of Arts in English. Because like I was taking chemistry and physics and electrical engineering, like just crazy stuff. But when I finally got, why? But people ask me sometimes, like, what are you majoring in? And they came out, I was like, graduation. So I majored in English because I was like, I can read and write. I can do that because it was a lot, So I did that, but what I realized in hindsight, that's where I really learned how to write. Like, I've always loved reading. I used to read as a child, always had my head in a book. But I learned how to write well at the Naval Academy in the English department. And so when I left the Marine Corps and went to my first job at the Department of Homeland Security, I had several job offers, but I took that job because my boss was a Latino woman. She was a graduate of second class of women from the Naval Academy. So she graduated in class of 81, just so you know how long, it wasn't that long ago. 81 was the second class of women, okay? So she graduated in class of 81. She was a retired Navy commander, and then she was an SES. So she was like a C-suite in the government, in the federal government. And she had a great reputation, like a little tiny lady, but had a great reputation. And I chose to go work for her because one of my mentors said, she has a great reputation, she's smart, she knows a lot, you can learn a lot from her. She was also a Christian. And so when I interviewed with her, she created a job for me, I interviewed for her, and she said, Natasha, you don't have to make a career of the federal government. She said, come here, do a good job, meet some people, network, meet some people. She said, use it as your transition job to figure out what you want to do. And so I had a lot of freedom in that. So when I started waking up in the middle of the night writing, which is how I started to write, like literally, like I couldn't sleep. I just had all these words start coming to me. And that started happening. I started to write. And one of our friends is the reason why I got my first article published. Like that was just, I sent her an email. I said, I think I have an article. And she sent it to Christianity Today. And then 3 days later, they emailed me. It was like, oh, we're going to publish this, give you $50. That time, I was glad to get the $50. I was like, okay, that's cool. You know, that was, easy day. So that just kind of one thing led to the other in that way. But I had space, is what I'm saying, to pivot. I had space to be honest that I didn't know what I was doing because the career I thought I was going to have wasn't working out, right? I had space to ask people, and I didn't have to compartmentalize, like I wasn't doing it in secret. Like, so when I started writing, I told her, and I thought I was going to go to seminary, and I told her, and she was always cheering. Yeah, Natasha, go do that. You should do that. And so writing just kind of ended up being one thing after another, sending one email, writing something, and going to school, and you got to write a dissertation anyway. I'm like, might as well publish it, right? So I got a twofer, and then I thought it was just going to be one book, and then God woke me up and started, writing another book. And so I have 2 books coming out next year, by the way, so y'all pray for that. Yeah, and sometimes it is therapy. This book was therapy for sure. I just cried a lot. I was glad when it was over. That's the truth. That's the truth. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Y'all loving these high-waist pants. I know. Give her a round of applause. Give her a round of applause. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
First. My question is, can you tell us a little bit about motherhood and the wilderness, either your mother or your experience as a mother? Thank you.
Lord, help us. Y'all, parenting is hard. Parenting, like I've done a ton of things, but I feel like parenting is the hardest thing that I've done because I really don't know what I'm doing. I really don't. And I feel like whenever she, she's 14 and a half, I'm like, we have 3 more years of this, right? It's like, I've done my best. And you're going to go and do something else in your own house, right? With your own people and your own friends. And I pray that you take some of these things that we've given you with you when you go. But if not, she can work it out in therapy. That's how I feel. That's the end of it. I mean, I've done my best with that. Parenting is hard, though. This is what I also learned. You feel like you're out here thinking of something, right? Or you're the only one feeling this way, and then you talk to other parents and you realize all y'all saying the same things. So that's good. Like, we were shopping for prom dresses a couple of weeks ago, and like listening to the other moms in the dressing rooms, like, no, we're not going to have our parts out. Why? Like, we're just not doing that. And it's like, but just try to dress on, though. Like, you don't know if you're going to like it or not till you try it on, because how it look on a mannequin don't mean that's how it's going to look on you. You understand? That's how parenting be in my house. Yeah. Look, no, I was not like that. I promise I wasn't. My child thinks she gonna be the boss of me. That's not how it's gonna work. I wasn't raised that way.
I want to thank you all. I want to share with you, if you have not gotten the book, to get the book.
Get the book. Thank you.
In chapter 9, it's called Death. Isn't that lovely? Truth is, remembering can bring us together. At the end of each chapter, there is either truth is or a reflection or time for you to give a personal affirmation that she gives you to work from. So I just want to share this with you. And then I will ask Karen to come up. So truth is, remembering and telling the truth are essential if we want to come out of the wilderness together and live in communities where freedom and justice reign for all. The reflection question is, What is God calling you to remember or to put to death? What is God calling you to remember or put to death? The personal affirmation is, I will live and not die in the wilderness. So I'm going to ask before Karen comes up that we all say that together. I will not live
and not.
I'm sorry.
I will live.
I missed it up.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Miss Sherry. All right. I'll read it again since I don't know what it is. I will live and not die in the wilderness.
Yes.
So let's say it together.
I will live and not die in the wilderness.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What a rich time. Thank you, friends, for being together with us tonight, for Carolyn, to Natasha, to all of you. Natasha Sistrunk Robinson is going to be returning for a long weekend at the end of April, Lord willing, with her mentees from Leadership Links. We're going to be pulling together a leadership dinner for women, people from the community, from the university. We'd love to have you be a part of it. I hope you'll reach out to me or anyone at Theological Horizons. No matter what your age or interest, there's a place for you to celebrate leadership and mentoring and relationships. So that'll be a really wonderful time. This is sort of a kickoff for that. But I just want to thank you again for sharing your life and your words with us. Would you read the final benediction to us from your book? I know that you've read it, and so I think the words are apt for us tonight. So go in peace as Natasha closes us tonight.
Accept this benediction from the Lord. From Exodus 15, verse 13. In your unfailing love, you will lead the people you have redeemed. In your strength, you will guide them to your holy dwelling. Amen. Thank you.